homecoming lecture. This is the start of homecoming weekend, and it's nice to see so many of our friends and alumni back with us. We have a really, really exciting program ahead of us, and I'm really looking forward to it, and I'm sure you are as well. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Marylynn Yates, and I'm the Dean of the College of Natural and Agricultural Sciences. And what I would like to do now is to introduce our Chancellor, Kim Wilcox, who's just going to say a couple of words of introduction. And for those of you who don't know Kim, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about him. He's a Midwesterner. He was actually born in the Upper Peninsula. And so he thinks that it's really, really, really hot here in California. He graduated from Michigan State with a bachelor's in audiology and speech sciences. He then went on to Purdue, where he earned both a master's and his doctoral degree in speech and hearing science. He then went to the University of Missouri as a faculty member for a few years, followed by 14 years at Kansas, where he was chair of the Department of Speech, Language, and Hearing for 10 years. He then served for 3 years as president and CEO of the Kansas Board of Regents. Clearly they do things a little differently in Kansas than they do here. He then served as dean of the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, as well as vice provost for general education coordination from 2002 to 2005. In 2005, he then went back to Michigan State, where it all began, and served as provost and vice president for academic affairs from 2005 to 2013. And then this past August 2013, Kim joined us as our 9th chancellor. So please join me in welcoming Kim Wilcox.
Thanks, Marylynn. Thanks and welcome to all of you. For all of you who are coming back home for homecoming, welcome home. And this is one of those times in the life of a university that we get to sit for a minute and appreciate what we have and why we have it. And what we have is a great university with great faculty, great students, great hopes, great aspirations. But the reason we have it is because of all of you, because of what you brought to us over the decades and over the years and what you left for us. So I'm always appreciative, and it's great to have homecoming, to have a chance to see and thank each of you. This is also a time for us to do all at once what universities are supposed to do. Universities are supposed to create and disseminate knowledge. And today we'll have a chance to hear about some of those creations and disseminate it not just in the traditional way within a 3-credit hour class that meets Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, but to a broader audience, an audience that touches lots of different parts of our society and the world. And I think you'll find that this afternoon you're going to hear from some of the very best, not just at UCR, but some of the very best in the world. So welcome, thanks for all that you've done, and thanks for all that you continue to do for UCR.
Thanks, Kim. So for those of you who've been with us for the last couple of years, we're doing something different this year. And so what I'm going to do is introduce the 3 people who are going to deliver the program, and then I'm just going to turn it all over to them. So as you know, the title of the lecture, it's actually going to be more of a discussion, I think, than a lecture, is A New Recipe for Agriculture, an Interdisciplinary Approach to the Challenges of Urbanization. And this discussion is going to be led by Professor Norm Ellstrand, who is a professor of genetics in our Department of Botany and Plant Sciences. Norm has a BS in biology from the University of Illinois. He also has earned a PhD from the University of Texas at Austin. He does research in the area of plant population genetics, and over the last several years has really gotten interested in the transfer of genes between plants out in the environment. And he has published many, many, many papers, almost 200, including a book called Dangerous Liaisons, When Cultivated Plants Mate with Their Wild Relatives. So Norm is going to, as I said, be leading the discussion. He will be joined by a colleague of ours from the UCLA School of Law, Michael Roberts, who is the executive director of a new program, the Resnick Program for Food Law and Policy. Mr. Roberts earned a BS in 1986 and then went on to get his JD in 1989 from the University of Utah. He practiced law for a while, and then I guess he decided he hadn't been going to school long enough. So he went back to the University of Arkansas and got a degree in, he got an LLM degree. He then, he actually there focused on agricultural law, which I understand the University of Arkansas is the only one that has a program in agricultural law. So it's quite a unique area of study. He then went on to the University of Arkansas, where he was a research professor of law and director of the National Agricultural Law Center. He taught food law and policy and founded the law school's Journal of Food Law and Policy, so you can tell there's this recurring theme of food, right? I understand he eats as well. He is the former first chair of the Lex Mundi International Agribusiness Practice Group, which is the world's largest association of private law firms. He was counsel in Washington, D.C. with Venable LLP as a member of the firm's Food and Agricultural Law Practice Group, and special counsel to the Roll Global Farming and Food Companies, which is headquartered in LA. Currently, he serves on the Los Angeles Food Policy Council's leadership board and chairs the Los Angeles Garden School Foundation. He also serves on the advisory board for the World Food Law Institute and the editorial board for MBPI Laws, an open access scholarly journal. And then our third participant this evening is Dr. Darrel Jenerette, who's an associate professor of landscape ecology in our Department of Botany and Plant Sciences. Dr. Jenerette received his PhD from Arizona State. Dr. Jenerette was a recipient of a graduate fellowship that funded his graduate training, and this was from the NSF. He also had a postdoctoral fellowship from the NSF from 2005 to 2007, and he had an early career fellowship, lots of fellowships in Dr. Jenerette's past. Early career fellowship from the Consortium of Universities for the Advancement of Hydrologic Sciences. He came to UCR 6 years ago, and he joined us in 2008. And earlier this year, Darrel was a member of a distinguished panel of scientists who presented their research findings to policymakers, which focused on cities, agriculture, and wildlands. This was held on Capitol Hill and was part of a briefing by the Association of Ecosystem Research Centers. So with that introduction to our three speakers, I'm going to turn it over to Professor Ellstrand.
Nice introduction, Marilyn. I would like to say that for those of you who are looking at your programs, that Dr. Craig Buggy is not able to make it. I called him during the break to see where he was, and he got held up by a very bad traffic jam in northern San Diego County, and we decided that rather than him driving at 120 miles an hour and making the last 5 minutes, that it would probably be okay for him to not show up. Anyhow, he does send his apologies. It's a real pleasure to be here and to have this panel that addresses some of the issues associated with challenges of urbanization and agriculture. I'd like to assess the audience, if I might, just to start to get an idea of who's here. Now, I did speak to a couple of advisory groups a short time ago, so how many of you heard my first talk? Okay. No problem, doesn't overlap at all. Okay, the next question is, how many of you are actively involved in agriculture now or grew up on a farm? Okay, so we do have a few people here. How many of you live in a city larger than 10,000 people? Okay, so that, that's sort of urban, right? Urbanization, good. How many of you who don't actively participate in agriculture actually are involved in the active growing of plants and or animals for their products? Okay, so that, yes, like growing tomatoes in your backyard or something like that. Okay, so you're participating in agriculture too. Good. So I'm gonna start with a few facts. There is a world population clock you can go to online, and when I visited it today, we were more than 7,274,000,000 people in the world, and it's really spinning fast in the little digits there. We passed 7 billion on Halloween in 2011. When I was born on January 1st, 1952, the population of the world was a little bit more than 2.5 billion. So we are coming up on 3 times as many people. Now that's a big change. And most of you are saying, we hear this all the time, lots of people, we're going to top out at 9 billion sometime between 2050 and 2100. And yeah, this is a big problem for agriculture. We've got to feed all those people. And if you're a scientist, you hear this all the time. I mean, at least 1 in 10 seminars starts with this population graph. We're in big trouble. We're actually in a little bit bigger trouble because, remember when I was born, 2.5 billion people. How many of them were living in a rural environment and how many of them were living in an urban environment? Well, actually, 1/3 of the people were living in an urban environment and 2/3 were growing food for themselves and growing food for other people. Sometime in the last 12 to 18 months, the majority, basically it flipped. The majority of people on the planet are living in urban environments now, more than 50%. So that means less than 50% are involved in rural environments, growing food for themselves and everybody else. So we rely on a minority of people involved in agriculture to grow food, fiber, those kinds of activities. The other thing is that this means there's a load of people who are living in cities now. And those people are using resources, they take space. And this urbanization is unprecedented, obviously, unprecedented in the history of humans. And so what does it mean? What are some of the challenges and opportunities created by this great demographic shift that happened in the last, marked by the change over 50% in the last 18 months? First is urban effects on rural agriculture, urban effects on the rural environment. Urban systems are dense collections of people. They create a lot of pollution. That pollution comes out into the rural environment. One of the things I had not thought of, because I live in the United States, but was called to my attention recently by a Chinese colleague, is that in many countries, massive urbanization creates a crisis in the labor force for agriculture because everybody's moving to the cities and there aren't enough people to farm back in the rural environments. Maybe not true in the United States, but definitely true elsewhere. People take up space, and in urban environments, where do we like to build? We like to build in flat areas, places connected historically to rivers, things like that. This is prime agricultural land being converted into urban hardscape. Diversion of natural resources. I think here in California, if you've been awake over the last 18 months, you know that there's conflict between water use by agriculture, or rural agriculture, and water use by humans. Most telling in Southern California is the trade from the Imperial Valley Water District to San Diego area. So from basically traditional agricultural use down to urban use. So that's one set of conflicts. Another set of conflicts is the urban-ag interface. As urban areas get larger, their interface with agriculture becomes more profound. Most typically, this involves then at the edges. People want to live on the edges because it's pretty, there aren't a lot of houses around, and there's all these farms and it's beautiful, except that the horses smell and there's sounds from cocking roosters, cocks and roosters and things like that. And so this urban interface has occurred for a long time, but even more so nowadays. And with some of the modern changes in agriculture, whereby you have industrial agriculture, sometimes these interfaces become more profound. I interviewed for a job for a chair of a department in Iowa a couple decades ago, and I was told if I could just forget that plant stuff and work on swine odor, people would be writing me million-dollar checks. Urban ag interface. Another thing that's happening, and I think this is particularly interesting, is the agrification of urban environments. Now, agriculture occurring within urban environments actually has occurred ever since the first city was built and people had little gardens. You know, the hanging gardens of Babylon thousands of years ago. So the coexistence of some managed plant and animal systems within urban areas is not, you know, it's not something new, but it's something that we're really looking at more closely nowadays with regards to urban policy, because the agrification of urban environments could be perceived as a negative thing, or it could be perceived as a positive thing. A good example is the city of Los Angeles, where there was a lot of tension between community gardens and the urban environment up until relatively short time ago. And so those of you who have lived in Southern California for a long time probably remember the conflict between the large community garden and, that was in, I think, South Central region and the surrounding community, and it had been held there for a long time. In 2009, Mayor Antonio Villaraigosa created the, if I remember correctly, it's called the Urban Food Policy Task Force. Is that right, Michael?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah, okay. So, and with the recognition that there are benefits to having agriculture in the middle of urban environments. Nutritionally, fresh fruits and vegetables actually are can help poor people, can help balance diets. The recognition of food deserts sometimes in highly dense urban environments. Greenscapes are actually good for people psychologically to see things that are actually growing. There are some environmental and ecosystem benefits. I'm not going to preempt some of the questions I'll be asking our panel. So, you know, there's basically some recognition of costs and benefits and new looks into urbanization, you know, the agrification of the urban environment. So I talked about Los Angeles. Some of you are Riverside based. You may or may not be aware that there's an initiative called Grow Riverside that's taking a look at this within Riverside. There's a Riverside Food Systems Alliance, which has been founded of dozens of community leaders, and 4 or 5 of us from UCR have been invited to participate in building policy. And the policy issues are issues that go beyond traditional agriculture. So these, you know, traditional agriculture departments are typically, you know, entomology, plant sciences. I can go on and on, but I mean, you'd recognize what the traditional ag departments are. You know, it's a lot of life sciences, a little sprinkling of things on the edges. Something, you know, home economics, although it's called consumer science now. You know, ag engineering usually sticks a department into the traditional ag college, and you get ag economics. Okay. Well, if you look over the priorities that we've created from the Riverside Food Systems Alliance, you'll see that the priorities are the sorts of things that are very different. Of course, there is the core of the traditional agricultural science there, but the priorities by these Riverside city leaders include things like creating a sustainable source of healthy food. So we're talking about nutrition, which would basically be in a school of medicine. We're talking about social justice, which would be in our College of Humanities and Social Sciences. We're talking about questions about food supply chains, so that would be in our College of Business. So I want to take this issue of urban agriculture and take it to a topic that I spoke about earlier today. We're working on building a new Institute of Agriculture that is going to bring together people from the traditional agricultural sciences as well as other people at UCR. And we have fabulous talent working on issues of this agriculture in the 21st century sense of integrating where people are basically working on these integrative topics. And the goal of the Institute then is to pull that talent together to really start addressing some of the questions associated, the complex questions associated with 21st century agriculture. To that end, we chose, the deans and I chose the topic of the interface of urbanization and agriculture as an example of the sorts of things that our new institute we call CAFÉ, California Agriculture and Food Enterprise. The sorts of topics that could be addressed by our talent here at UC are not necessarily that we are going to, as a group, when we become formal, actually deal with that topic. That's for the membership to decide after we formalize. But it makes a good topic for the sorts of outreach activities we're going to do. So this is the first outreach activity of CAFÉ in cooperation with the College of Natural and Agricultural Sciences. We're going to be having more activities even before CAFÉ becomes real. And we're going to cooperate on the Science Public Lecture Series in the spring quarter. I'd like to invite you to that. And now I'm going to welcome Michael Roberts to present his take on urbanization and agriculture. He's just written a chapter on this topic, so it's a timely topic and one that he's well qualified to speak about.
Thank you, Norm. I appreciate that, and Dean Yates for the earlier introduction. It's an honor to be here. I enjoyed listening to the Chancellor's remarks earlier, and I feel a little gun-shy now that I know I'm from that U.S. news-centric university. But at any rate, it is an honor. What a wonderful topic, and what a wonderful forum we have here today. I grew up on a small farm. We called it a truck farm, and we grew fruits and vegetables, and I was sustainable before I knew being sustainable was popular, thanks to this farm. Like many others with a similar upbringing, I was encouraged to leave and go to school and become a professional. 15 years ago, I was sitting at my desk at a blue chip law firm and bored to death. And I was reading an article, I believe from the Harvard Business Review, although I have been unable to find that article again. But it was an article on the future of food. And for whatever reason, that article really resonated with me. And I decided at that point that I was going to devote the rest of my life to food law, although I had no idea what it meant at the time. And mulling that over for a while led to a sequence of events that has landed me here today. But I recall when I decided to leave my law firm and go to the University of Arkansas to seek an LLM in agricultural law, the president of the firm was very concerned and called me into his office and offered me professional counseling. And I remember he told me he would pay out of his own pocket if I would go to Stanford or Yale or Georgetown and get an LLM in international law, which was my practice at the time. And I still remember him telling me, as he sat across the desk, that Michael, no one talks about food and agriculture. Agriculture is dead. What are you doing with your life? And he called me about 3 or 4 years ago and asked me the question, how did you know? Every time I pick up a newspaper, there's an article about food and agriculture. And I told him it's sometimes better to be lucky than smart. And I'm not exactly sure what drew me to a field that would happen to be so hot. But it has been an enjoyable experience. I've been credited with teaching the first food law and policy course at a law school some 10 years ago. There was a recent law review article written on the development of food law and policy in law schools. This class is now being taught in over 24 law schools. Just this year, Yale Law School had its first food law and policy course that was taught. 3 weeks ago, we just concluded our first annual UCLA Harvard Food Law Conference in Los Angeles. Next year it will be in Cambridge. Harvard Law School now has a food law program akin to the one that we have at UCLA. Last week I just returned from China in Beijing, where I've been teaching actually for a number of years, and I've been closely associated now with Renmin University Law School in Beijing. Renmin University Law School is China's #1 ranked law school. And they just started a food law program in December of 2013. And we're collaborating and working together on a lot of different projects. I share these things with you to underscore that this really is a movement, and it's a tremendous movement, and it's fun to be a part of. And it's a part of science, it's a part of health, it's a part of medicine, it's a part of a lot of different disciplines, including the law. I'm often asked the question, what is food law? What does it cover? I'm actually writing a treatise that will be published by Cambridge Press next year on food law. And it covers everything from safety to labeling to marketing to nutrition to regulation of diet to sustainability, security, food equity to trade, to food fraud, aquaculture, you name it. We cover a lot of topics. Now, it is distinguished from agricultural law, which I used to actually teach and was director of the Center in Arkansas. Food law, as we define it, is more focused on the consumer and not necessarily in the production of food. So there's different bodies of law that are now evolving that cover this vast modern food system that we have. So it is multi-doctrinal. And one of the advantages, although it may seem a little odd to folks that were at UCLA, one of the advantages of being in an urban environment is that Los Angeles does have a very diverse food system, a lot of diverse food eaters. You can travel the globe in a short radius on various restaurants and eateries in the city of Los Angeles. I remember I was teaching one of my first classes at UCLA as an adjunct before I was hired as the executive director of this new program at UCLA. And I had a class of about 22 students, and I recall asking the students, how many of you have been to a farm? Not one hand was raised. The first question was, how many of you were raised on a farm? As you can imagine, no one raised their hand. I said, how many of you have been to a farm? Not one hand was raised. And I said, well, how am I supposed to teach you food? If you don't know where food comes from. And so I gave them the assignment, go out and find a farm. And they said, Professor Roberts, we don't know where we can find a farm. And I said, I don't know, I'm new to Los Angeles. Go out and find one, get extra credit. So a few did find a farm, and now I know where a number of farms are. I serve on the LA Food Policy Council, so I've become acquainted with a number of wonderful farms in LA and other areas. But the only time I've ever had a parent call me. I had a parent call me at my home, and his father said, look, my daughter is very embarrassed that I'm calling her. She's in your law class, but I spent the entire weekend helping her find a farm. And I'm so excited about this class. Can I take your class? And I said, sure. And his daughter was very embarrassed. But he took the class, and it was an interesting experience. I tell my students, not all of you will become food law lawyers. There's not enough work right now, although some of the largest law firms in the world right now are actually starting food law practices. But what we're trying to do with our program is create better food citizens. And I was visiting with Michael Pollan, as I mentioned during the break, a few months ago, and he's been very helpful in terms of trying to, as we establish a clinic within our program that will enable students to go out there and actually do community service and work in this field. But he lamented the fact that there aren't enough professionals involved in these state food policy councils and local food policy councils. And so what we try to do is create good food citizens with our program. So to the topic of today, urban agriculture. This is one of the great topics of food law and policy, and it certainly is germane to what we do at UCLA given our environment in the city in which we work. I want to mention just 5 points, if you will, related to urban agriculture, and these are largely derived from a book that I wrote, the introductory chapter to on the foundation of urban agriculture that will be published by the American Bar Association in the next month or two. But the first point is that urban agriculture certainly has enjoyed a resurgence. Urban agriculture encompasses, as you all know, a variety of economic and social activities related to food production, distribution, processing, eating, and disposal. It includes farmers markets, farm stands, CSA ventures, And most of these projects in urban communities are linked to the local food movement. It's about paying attention to our food, where it comes from, how it was produced, and what it contains. Now, urban agriculture, sometimes we think that things are new when they're not new. And urban agriculture is not new. In the 19th century, it was very much a part of the urban landscape. The 20th century, it largely disappeared, at least in America. In the 1970s, due to urban abandonment, there was a slow resurgence. But really, it's been only in the last 5 years that this trickle has turned into a flood. Now, illustrative of this trend and showing that urban agriculture really is embedded in popular culture now is the first episode of the sketch comedy show Portlandia, which many of you may have seen. It mocks this trend, particularly the desire to know where our food comes from by taking it to an extreme. When out to dinner, the two main characters refused to order without first paying a visit to the local source of the restaurant's chickens to ensure the chickens were well treated. It's a very humorous episode. If you haven't seen it, I encourage you to watch it. Now, more than just the subject of mockery, the interest in local sourcing is evident everywhere from the White House garden, and I do have family friends who are far enough to the right to be associated with Attila the Nun, who have told me the exact cost of that White House garden. How they knew that cost, I don't know. But at any rate, it is certainly the source of mockery, including even a recent episode of The Simpsons featuring a rooftop garden on the top of the Quickie Mart. Secondly, urban agriculture reflects the dissatisfaction at some level with the modern food system. And this dissatisfaction covers a litany of challenges, including, amongst others, environmental harms, food access problems, hunger, and a lack of transparency. Third point, the urban agriculture is deeply rooted in the American agrarian traditions. Thomas Jefferson, the patron saint of the agrarian mentality, although he never elucidated the elements of urban agriculture, he often connected virtue and agriculture with lofty language, such as those who labor in the earth are the chosen people of God, if ever he had a chosen people, whose breast he has made his particular deposit for substantial and genuine virtue, close quote. This Jeffersonian creed for agrarianism has three basic tenets. One, agrarianism is connected to nature. Two, agriculture engenders a sense of belonging to the community. And three, it's a check against the evils of urbanism, capitalism, and the imbalance of modern society. This creed has permeated throughout our American consciousness. It's evident in politics, literature, art, and culture in general. And it certainly has implications that resonate with us via urban agriculture and its resurgence. Point number 4, the resurgence of urban agriculture has required and will continue to require innovative planning and legislating. The 20th century urban land use law and planning called for a separation of uses and isolation of cities from their agriculture hinterlands. Now, the widespread adoption and development of urban agriculture in recent years, however, has required both a reconceptualization of cities themselves and even the revamping of legal frameworks. So new urbanism and agricultural urbanists ask how planners can incorporate food planning methodologies to facilitate environmental sustainability, social economic development, and public health. Legislating includes the revamping of the legal framework through the development and implementation of legal tools, which include changes to municipal codes, property tax incentives, government acquisition of land for agricultural purposes, even governmental federal programs that focus on research, funding. Point number 5 and the last point. The sustainability of urban agriculture requires a hard look at the promises and the limitations of urban agriculture. For example, there are equity concerns. The concentration of the alternative food movement, with very notable exceptions, has in some cases been restricted to the white neighborhoods. In addition to, in connection with this problem, economic justice. Oftentimes this food movement has been seen as cost prohibitive for some consumers, especially those who want to frequent farmers markets and even CSAs. There are also ecological concerns. This involves scaling up concerns and questionable environmental benefits, and of course the problem of water. However, neither equity or ecological concerns are fatal to urban agriculture's endeavor. The lesson, though, needs to be that we ought to be thoughtful about the implementation of the use of these legal and policy tools. So urban agriculture may not be the cure-all for the ills of modern farming or to meet the demands of a growing planet and population, but it deserves a place at the food policy table, not as an end in itself, but as a means to foster a food system that is healthy, just, and sustainable. Thank you.
Okay, so now we get to the fun part. Actually, this is all fun. Although, you know, I had this list of questions all planned for the panel, and Michael answered them all. So, so I'd like to actually start by saying, asking the question of the two professors here. There's been a radical change in the last 5 years about our perception of the place of agriculture in the urban environment. I plugged urban agriculture into Wikipedia, and I came up with a list of cities that are, in just the last 10 years, have made massive changes. Cairo, Mumbai, Bangkok. At the same time, Michael pointed out that 20th century, there was strong land policy to segregate agriculture from urban environments. So what I'd like to do is to have our two professors look into a crystal ball and give me their view of what will be the state of urban agriculture in about 30 years from the present. Either one of you can pick that up and run with it.
Sure. Well, one, you have increasing expansion of urbanization into traditionally agricultural areas, such as encroaching on our orchards and around here, or other big fields where the land value becomes just so much that people convert it and give it up to houses and whatnot. At the other end, I think this expansion of small-scale home urban agriculture and community gardens seems like a trajectory that's certainly expanding rapidly right now. It's historically, that trajectory has come and gone with economic state of affairs, and so we're coming out of a large recession. And whether or not community gardens will continue to expand or will retract back into something, there seems to be other ongoing societal movements, such as the push for local food, that may continue it on. So I think it's an open question.
Yeah, I think the one thing that gives me it makes me expect that this will be a sustainable long-term movement that will result in some tangible changes in most urban areas around the country, is the fact that this is a movement of young people. And I have been struck that young people, I'm talking about college-age students and younger, and those in my law class now, they're way ahead of the curve. It's the universities who are trying to catch up. It's just amazing to me, the demand by young people to incorporate food into their lifestyle is really quite amazing. And I see it not just in the U.S., but worldwide. As I mentioned, I was just in China 6 months ago. I was in Shanghai and went to an organic farm in Shanghai and ate at the restaurant. And it's a very trendy place for young people. And it's a movement that is hard to quantify. If I put your finger on it, I don't think it's a fad. And I think it goes all the way down to young children As you know, as announced, I serve as chair of the LA School Garden Foundation, and there's a great receptivity of young children who are enrolled in schools in communities around the country again, who are very interested again in a food lifestyle. And so I think that demand will create change, and where that change. But in any movement, we never really reach our aspirations, and so I'm sure there's going to be disappointments, there's going to be challenges, there's going to be barriers. We certainly can't feed the world through urban agriculture, but it will, I think, eventually result in different kinds of cities and the way they look. And you know, Seattle and Boston are examples of cities that have really changed, and Detroit and the cities around Detroit have really changed in ways that reflect this demand.
Seems like there's a generation gap, where in a lot of the community gardens that we've sampled in Los Angeles, they're predominantly much older people working in there, as opposed to not this this 30s to 40 age group that's participating.
Well, for one reason, the waiting list to get into a community garden it takes a long time. But I have a lot of young students who are gardening, so I tend to. I don't know. I mean, I don't have the numbers, so I don't know statistically if I'm supported in my view. But I think, you know, and a lot of them are as Michael Pollan has suggested, if you don't have space for garden, you put a planter in your window box. Just the orientation. So it's not necessarily perhaps this garden is one measurement, but not the complete measurement.
I've got another question. Okay, I've got another question. Michael alluded to ecosystem services and whether or not Scale Up would be would provide those same services. Now, I just happen to know that Darrel's research program includes some of those ecosystem services. So, for purposes of educating the audience, Darrel, I was wondering if you could enumerate some of those services and guess about whether Scale Up over time would, how that would impact those services.
Sure. So ecosystem services are it's a relatively new concept. It's been around maybe 10 to 15 years within the ecological field, and it's an approach to link the functions of ecosystems, what ecosystems are doing, like growing and decomposing organic matter, to specific uses by society. And that linkage there is in this concept of ecosystem services. What are the functions that provide benefits for people? And examples of that are food production, pollinators, climate regulation. A big part of my work in urban environments is looking at the role of vegetation in cooling the urban environment. So these community gardens, in one sense, they create an island of cooling, and it's unclear how far that perpetuates out, but at least in these gardens it can be much cooler than the surrounding hardscape there, and that's just one example of ecosystem services. At the other end, we've thought a lot about what's the disservice, and no one's quite happy with that term yet, but what's the ecological cost associated with relying on ecosystem functioning? And water, as you alluded to, there's a clear one out here that we have to afford water. And from my perspective, it seems like the scaling up of these ecosystem services makes a lot of sense, and it seems like it's a really valuable use of water in the environment. I cannot imagine much more effective uses of water.
Michael, would you like to respond to that?
Well, I would defer to your expertise in this area.
Okay, I just wondered what.
Yeah, I do. So I am curious about your comment about scaling up affords a more efficient use of water. Did I hear that correct? In an urban environment?
Oh, I am not concerned with the water. I think that is, like, we have water that needs to be allocated, and that's an area to allocate the water. It would seem like. I'm not sure about the efficiencies of these in terms of water. They're very labor intensive, and that's like how they work, and that human efficiency is really important.
Yeah, and I also wonder too. I mean, there is some clamor, although I think it's probably overestimated as to the effects of urban agriculture on rural areas who may be affected through not having traditional markets by which to bring the food into urban communities, or at least not have the same economic benefits. But I tend to think those concerns are probably a little inflated. But it would be interesting to collect some data and see what kind of effect that it does have.
At the other end, with that though, in some of our work in the community gardens of Los Angeles, in one trip to a single garden, we identified a weed that was unknown to California. So that's a potential outflow of these invasive pests, perhaps, into more traditionally rural agriculture. There's a lot of examples in California where pests are critical.
I mentioned too that there's existing land that sometimes is often seen as potential land to be converted into agricultural use that has ground contamination issues that you wouldn't normally find elsewhere.
Absolutely, you can see that in a lot of these community gardens where the lead levels are more than double California standards. And it's really variable in these, like one garden, one plot within a garden can be really contaminated and you walk 3 plots down and it's not. And so understanding what are the causes and consequences of contamination seems really important for securing safe food, both from eating it directly as well as just having children play in the garden area.
Yeah.
So I've got a question for Michael now, and that's, what do you think is the next hot topic in food law?
I think antibiotics. I think there's a real concern with antibiotics. We don't know the effects, especially the residual effects of residual antibiotics, the effects on resistance to antibiotics, especially with children, and not just in the U.S., but elsewhere. We now import about 90% of our fish into this country, which is it's amazing. And a lot of this fish comes from areas where there's a lot of problems, including the use of illegal antibiotics. And so I think that's an area that we need to examine carefully. And I think Europe is moving to more stringent rules in that area, and I would be surprised if we didn't, as well as science continues to come out. But that's, I think, one area, as the next minute.
Darrel, do you want to say anything about that topic?
It seems like land use policy in the urban environment is really important for how getting these gardens going. I know the Riverside group is having trouble just from a legal perspective of how do they get mortgages on the land.
So
Yeah, I'm good. Yeah.
okay, so it is a little late, but I would like to open it up right now for a Q&A for 5 to 10 minutes. I see Vernon's got a question.
Yeah,
Oh, and please push your button.
And you have to hold it.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, you have to hold it.
Yeah, and you have to hold the button, unfortunately.
For those who know me, I'm with a bank that's a large financer of all types of farms, large to small, and we are worried about feeding the world. And I guess what I'm feeling uncomfortable with, because I've even heard you make reference to the modern ills of farming, but how do you drive that with the fact that the majority of organic food and local food sold at even the well-known stores like Whole Foods is sold by very large farms, what some people would call corporate farms. They're still family-owned in many cases, but they're very large farms. And they're the ones that are actually benefiting from this growth in organic and local. And they're doing it in a very sustainable way. Michael, you acknowledge that this isn't going to feed the world, but the tone I hear is, let's get away from that bad farming stuff and do community farming. And I'm feeling very uncomfortable with this. How do you make that jive with the fact that large farms are the ones that are growing the organic and local stuff?
Oh, I don't, if I created that impression, I certainly apologize. What I tried to explain is the reasons for the growth of urban agriculture, and there are the advocates of urban agriculture use that as one of the rationales. However, I do agree with you that there are certain merits to large farms. I think personally, since you've asked me, frame your question in a personal way, I think that there's enough room for lots of different kinds of farming. And in some ways, I think the dichotomy between large conventional farming and organic farming is unfortunate, because I think that we then put all of our we invest all of our goodwill, if you will, in terms of sustainability into organic farms. And I think the answer for me is all farms ought to be more sustainable, including conventional and non-organic farms as well as organic farms. What you say is very true about organic farms. Some of them are very large. In fact, the United States just entered into a treaty with Europe last year, a trade treaty that accommodates the trade between Europe and the US for organic food. It's remarkable. When the organic food movement started, we never even would have envisioned such a thing. When I was working on a farm as a kid, I remember folks who would buy our produce that we used to spray, and we call it organic, in the neighborhood store. That's a very different world than what we have today with organic farms. Some of these farms are very large, and some of them are very small. But I think there's enough room for a lot of different approaches to farming, including urban agriculture and large conventional farming. And I think it's unfortunate when we sometimes focus on the dichotomies that exist. I don't know that they're terribly that fruitful.
Darrel, do you want to comment?
Sure, I would also agree that large-scale agriculture is a requirement for feeding the planet. I think, as you alluded to in the beginning, more than half of the people in the world now are in cities than in a rural environment. There's not the labor force. The community agriculture requires an extensive labor force of working out there many hours per pound of vegetable compared to a large-scale organization where you can take advantage of mechanization. And I think that interplay is really important. And the community agriculture within urban environments seems to be playing a different role than what large-scale agriculture would play. It's not providing calories per se, and maybe that's a proportion of nutrition, but it's providing opportunities to learn about nutrition. And the school lunch programs where they just force vegetables onto plates ends up with a lot more wastage compared to a few programs that have gotten kids involved with school gardens, and now they're engaged with the food process and they're learning about food and consuming more vegetables. I think there's an interaction there. We can't get rid of the large farms, nor do we want to.
Okay, Peter Atkinson.
It's a very naive question, Darrel, but you mentioned soil contamination differences, and you gave an example of lead, and you go 3 blocks down, and it's different. And I would, tell me if I'm wrong, but I would guess that just simply reflects the previous utilisation of those 2 sites. But regardless of that, one thing I notice around here is when there are huge excavations going on, that trucks take soil out and I don't know where the soil goes, and I'm sure that's the same for any construction, real estate development, when they're regrading the land and they need to bring soil in. Does anybody track where that soil goes? So if one in the urban environment does establish urban agriculture, and I guess somebody like me would assume that the soil at my feet has always been there, but maybe it hasn't, and maybe it's come from a place that I really should know about. Does anybody pay attention to that or not?
People certainly look into urban soils, and there's a growing interest on it because of the weird things people do to the soil. Pick it up and move it all over the place. And they have not, I'm not aware of an analysis that's tracked where soil is moved around, and certainly people would be interested in seeing that kind of results. It certainly affects how soil is growing and what you get when you grow on it, and I think it's an interesting scientific question. For my work in trees and plants, we've seen a similar thing where, succession we're thinking of in ecology is going from a small plant up to a tree, and people will plant 20-foot tall palm trees, just plop them down in the front yard, just move them around.
Any more questions? Okay, I'd like to first I'd like to thank the panel. And my microphone back to the Master of Ceremonies.
Again, I really appreciate Darrel and Michael and Norm as well for giving us a lot of things to think about. So at this point, our formal program is over, but I have a feeling that there are refreshments out in the lobby. So please stay around, talk with Michael, Darrel, Norm, meet someone maybe that you don't know, and just enjoy the rest of the evening. And thanks for coming.